Started a new series called Flip This House. And how many of you guys watch those flipping the house TV shows? I get sucked into those, you know? And I don't know why, because I'm not a real estate mogul, but I get sucked into them and I'm watching all of them. The guys who are searching for a house overseas, to the folks who are battling against each other to get this house. But if you don't know that premise, flipping a house is when you buy a house that needs a little TLC. Maybe it's undervalued at the moment, and you put just a little bit, hopefully, just a little bit of work into it, and then you're able to sell it quickly and make a large profit. Well, this series, we're not going to be talking about how you can sell your house and make a large profit. But if anyone would like to give me lessons later, I sure would appreciate that. But what we're going to be talking about is not flipping the house that you live in, but flipping the life of the house that's lived. Flipping the life that's lived in the house in which you live. In the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about parenting, we're going to be talking about marriage, and we're going to be talking about just the dynamics of family and lots of things. But today, we're going to start by talking about legacy. Now, how many of you know what legacy is? Yeah, so many times when we're thinking about legacy, there we go. When we're thinking about legacy, we're thinking about something that used to be, something that we have done that we can pass on to the next generation. And we think about the legacies that have been passed on to us. But we're going to be talking about the legacy that we live out right now. And that's a key thing that we need to talk about. The legacy that we live out today in our house. Because everyone in this room, you are living out a legacy right here, right now. It is not something that we just sit by and hope it develops well. It's something that we can control and something that we can do, that we have a lot of control over. It's not something we leave behind when we die, but it's what we live out right here. Right here today, you are forming your legacy. Already I've talked to you about your legacy because as I sat in that seat, your actions blessed my life. And so that's a part of your legacy. Later on, and years down the road, when I move on to another church or whatever, I'll talk about how when I came to CrossWinds, I sat among people who worshiped so passionately, and it moved me, and it changed my outlook. And that's a part of your legacy. So legacy is something that we live out right here, right now, right where we are. And it would help if you choose the right button on your little clipper. Right? You guys know I'm new to this church. This is my arch nemesis. Okay? I was halfway through worship this morning when I realized I don't have the clicker, and I was like, I've spent so much time on these awesome slides, I need the clicker. So you just have to bear with me a little bit. It happens. I want to tell you today about the legacy of a 5-foot saint. My great-grandmother, when I was growing up, my great-grandparents actually lived 2 houses down from me. And so she got the name Grandma. Okay, I had all of my great-grandparents who are still alive, my grandparents are still alive, so my grandparents got called by their first name, not as a sign of disrespect, but because I had so many people and I was such a small child, I only had a few names. So she got the name Grandmother, and my whole family adopted that. I called her my grandmother. She was a saint, and her legacy has shaped so many lives. If you ask anyone around town about my great-grandmother, they will tell you that she was a woman of just unique and amazing love, that she always dealt well with everyone that she came in contact with. And if there was ever anyone in need, they could come to my great-grandmother and she would bend over backwards to help them. But how she really built that legacy is by allowing us to see her life in its most intimate times, in its most intimate spaces. And you can see that she had a big effect on me. She loved to cook 3 meals a day for her entire family. And I loved it. There's nothing like great-grandmama's biscuits. I don't know what she put in them, but they are awesome. But there's another legacy that she had that she always invited us to go to. During the summer at 5 a.m., no matter what the weather was, at 5 a.m. she was in her garden, hoeing and harvesting and taking care of the garden. And she always invited her grandkids and her great-grandkids to come and help. And I'm going to make a confession. Rarely did I make that appointment, okay? I was just 2 houses down, but that was all far early. But the times that I do go, I remember this. When she went through that gate, and she got into that garden, she began to sing hymns. She began to sing songs of love to God. And when the song would end, she would immediately go into a conversation. Now I know that we've all heard that prayer is this ongoing conversation with God, and we like to think that. This lady had this ongoing conversation to where when you were there, you were kind of looking around to see who she was talking to. She had that kind of a connection with God. But let me tell you, this 5-foot-tall little woman can humble the biggest of men in her family. Because as it came time for her to pray, if there was something going on in your life, she was going to pray for you, whether you were there or not. And so many times that I did go and visit her, I heard her pray, Lord, be with Scott. Help him find his way in life. Help him not be such a heathen. You know? And so as a high school boy, as an athlete, I go and I'm there, and there's my great-grandmother, a little 5 foot tall, and getting older in life, and she's praying, and man, I felt humble. I wanted to live for her. But I also knew that she had my back. So she prayed and she prayed and she prayed for me and for my cousins and for people all over town. And we could see her do that. Now, how does that legacy play into my life? I wandered away from God for a long, long time as a young man. But when God started speaking to me and started bringing me back in and bringing me into His arms and into His love, the thought that crossed my mind that made me get over that hump of where I was living to where I needed to live was the idea that my great-grandmother had been praying for me for years. Her legacy allowed me the courage to take another step in my life. But that came 3 years after she passed away. She got to see me go to church, and she got to see me do a few church things because I did those to please her. But she never got to see me walk the walk of a disciple as a lover of Christ. And that's the funny thing about our legacy. Our legacy doesn't always pay immediate dividends, but it always pays dividends. She may not have got to see everything right away, but her prayers affected me greatly. In the Bible, we hear about Paul. And Paul had a young man named Timothy. He mentored Timothy in so many ways. Timothy was a young pastor. And as Paul wrote a letter to Timothy. And we have it in the Bible. It's one of them. There's 2 letters actually. The one we're talking about today is 2 Timothy. And Paul wrote this to Timothy. He said, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. Paul wrote that to remind Timothy of where he had come and to pay homage to that legacy that brought him there. But it did so much for Timothy's life. Timothy was who he was at that point because of the people that had raised him to know Christ and to follow Christ and to be dedicated. Just like my great-grandmother did so much to help me, Lois and Eunice did that to help Timothy. And now Paul comes into the scene, able to take Timothy even further in his walk with Christ. But it was all because of that legacy these 2 women did. They invested in Timothy. And because of their legacy of faith that they passed on to him, he was able to rise up and do the right thing. He was able to stay true to the course when those around him were falling away. Legacy depends on convictions. You and I right now are making legacy, good or bad, and it's affecting everyone around us. But we are creating legacy right now, and that legacy is being driven by our convictions. And I didn't really know what that word meant a whole lot, so I looked it up this week, and I found out that in 1972, the Supreme Court actually decided and determined, in all their wisdom, because you know how wise those guys are, that there was a difference between preference and conviction. They said a preference is a belief that can possibly be changed by pressure from an outside source. It's something you prefer doing, but if someone offers something else, you're willing to change your mind. But they go on and they say that a conviction is a belief that's so strong that a person would risk death rather than give it up. Wow, when I looked at those 2 words, I started kind of looking at my life, and I started formulating where are my preferences and where are my convictions. And then yesterday I had one of my convictions played out. I have a preference. This is going to seem so shallow, but it's me, okay? So please don't pass judgment. I prefer real mayonnaise, right? My wife buys Miracle Whip. I'm okay with Miracle Whip, but if I go to the refrigerator and they're both side by side, I prefer real mayonnaise, but then Miracle Whip's a good, I'm cool with that too, right? So yesterday, I go and we're grilling out after horseback riding, and I'm ready to make a hot dog. And I find the burnt hot dog, which again is my preference. I want the one that's blackened all over. I love those. So I get that burnt hot dog, and I'm so thankful no one else ate it. And then I wondered if someone dropped it, but I tried to get that out of my head. And I found the relish, and I found the mustard, and then I reached for the ketchup. Here's where convictions come to play. Because I am convinced deep within my soul that there's only one brand of ketchup that's worthy of my hot dog. Anyone else there? Heinz, thank you very much. For those of you who are shaking your head going, come on, ketchup? You do not know the joy that Heinz ketchup can bring to your life. And if you're the one who brought the ketchup here today, please, I'm not offended, but I had this perfect hot dog and I reached and it wasn't Heinz ketchup. And I put it down. I just put it back down. I said, not for me today. I am convinced. Now, I don't know if I'm totally convinced, because if someone was risking death over choosing non-Heinz ketchup, I might give in a little bit. I'm not real sure. I wouldn't enjoy it, I promise you that. And I would repent. But this is what a preference and a conviction is that I'm convinced that there's only one type of ketchup. And so, that's what it is. But as we look at the Bible, we look back at Paul again, and Paul had some really strong convictions. Paul had some really, really strong places that he was not going to bend on. And he goes on and he writes to Timothy about some of the things that he's going through. And we find Paul, he's in prison, and he's being tortured, he's being beaten, and he's facing death. And he writes to Timothy a little bit later in that same letter these words, I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed. And I am convinced that he is able to guard until that day what has been entrusted to me. Paul was convinced that God was in control. He is hopeless. He is bound. He is being beaten. He is being pressured from every side to denounce his Christ. But he is convinced that God has him. Folks, that is a legacy of faith. That is strong. That is much beyond ketchup and mayonnaise, right? That's the good stuff. And Paul lived that out in front of Timothy. And again, changed Timothy. What was going on with Timothy and Paul's relationship right now is that as Paul was thrown into prison, many of the other pastors that Paul had mentored started falling away. They went into hiding. They did the whole Peter thing. And I don't know Paul. I've never heard of Paul. I'm not friends with Paul. And they abandoned him. But this young pastor, Timothy was a young guy. This young pastor, he stayed the course. Because he saw something. He saw something in Paul that he wanted. Paul's convictions built his legacy. And that affected the way Timothy lived his life. Christ was not a preference for Paul. This was not something he could take off. It's not something it's not a shirt he could put on that says, hey, I love Jesus. But then when someone says, hey, I don't like that Jesus got me either. I don't know why I wore that shirt. It was the only thing I had clean. That was not Paul. Paul had a conviction about who his Jesus is. You know, I had a conviction once too. When I first gave my life to Christ, I wanted everyone to know, and so I wanted to represent Christ in everything I do. And so I bought one of those little chrome fish to go on the back of my car. Anyone else have one of those? Just me. Awesome. All right, one more. Okay. It's really stupid I did. I'm just kidding. I lived in Birmingham at the time, and I was a country boy going into the city with all this traffic, and I did not do a good job of controlling my anger. And so I realized that some of the gestures and the words that I was shouting through my car windshield did not really reflect that fish on the back of my car. So I had to remove it. Okay? My wife was able to hold on to hers for a little bit longer, but eventually the world went out. But the thing is, we do stuff like that, we don't live it out because it's not really a conviction. It really becomes a preference. I wanted people to think that I was a Christian, but I wasn't really willing to change the way I lived my life. And still to this day, even as one of your pastors, there's no fish on the back of my truck, okay? Just in case I slip, okay? I don't want to lead anyone, not that I'm going to slip because I'm an angel. But the thing is, Christ can't be something that we cast off if he's going to be a part of what builds our legacy. That legacy that we're building, he has to be in the center of that. And for Paul, Christ was not a preference at all. His conviction formed that legacy. And he lived that legacy out. Again, that's that key part. Lived it out before Timothy. He became that example for Timothy. And it changed the way Timothy lived his life. It changed the way Timothy ministered to the people around him. So you and I are living out that legacy right here, right now. With the choices that we make and the way that we act and the way that we interact with other people, the way that we worship on a Sunday morning, the way that we act when someone cuts us off in traffic. And our house is not just four walls that we live in, but it's anywhere that we are where life is taking place. And so people come into our house every day. They come into our house, that zone of influence. They come into that while we're at work. They come into it while we're out eating with our family. They come into it while we're at church. They come into it when we're at home. There are people who are influenced by our house even when we don't know that they're looking. Because everyone in here, know this, someone is looking at you. Whether it be little children, or peers, or those people at work, or the people that see that fish on the back of your car. I guess we only have one guilty verdict on there, so drive good. But when we wear those CrossWinds shirts, we knock on a door on Tuesdays and Saturdays to tell people about Christ and about this church that's coming, they are looking at you. And this is the hard lesson I'm teaching my girls. Our girls walk with us when we do that. And our girls, I mean, they're beautiful children, and I love them to death, but they don't have that filter of social interaction yet. So they just say whatever pops to their mind, you know? Like, oh, did you see how many kids were in that house? I'm like, no, you know? We try to, sometimes we just want to duct tape them, you know? Just go, y'all stay at the road and wave and be pretty. That's doesn't always work. But when we do that, we're living our legacy in those neighborhoods. And you know what we're hearing from those neighborhoods? We're already hearing buzz, and we're already hearing excitement about what's going on because the legacy that many of you have already planted there simply by knocking on doors and telling people that you love them. And you're doing something in that area and you want them to come be a part. And it makes a difference, a tremendous difference. We're living out our legacy as we speak. But there comes a day when we're all going to be done with our work here. And when we're done, they're going to erect a tombstone for us. And there's going to be a birth date, and there's going to be an end date. But the most important part about what's there is that little dash in between those two dates. Because right now, you're in the dash. And how you live that dash totally will make up people's minds about what they say when you're gone. My great-grandmother lived that dash very well, and generations after her are still following her example. Paul lived that dash well and affected Timothy. Eunice and Lois lived that dash well and raised Timothy up to be a man of faith. So the question we have to ask this morning is, how's your dash? How are you doing with the dash so far? And how do we take our lives from where they are right now and mold them and shape them and trim a little off the edges and make them a powerful and positive legacy? Living our legacy is simple. We start living Monday through Saturday like we try to live on Sunday morning. Sunday morning, we put on our best, don't we? And we come here and we try to be so friendly to everyone that we see. We have to live Monday through Saturday. And really, going back up, we said we have to live Sunday afternoon through Saturday night, just like we try to live this morning. I have friends who are in the restaurant business as waiters and waitresses. And you know what day they hate working more than any? Sundays. Why? Because people who come in after church usually tip the less and are the most rude. What a horrible legacy we're living if that's the way they see us. But how easy would it be to live a better legacy of simply being on Sunday afternoon at lunch like we are on Sunday morning in worship? I know that hits at home, hits for me. And I'm thinking right now how much I tipped the waiter last week, you know? And this week is going to be my wife at home, so she's not going to get anything. But, of course, I said that, I'll probably not get any lunch either. But that's all right. That's how it works. But our legacy is something that right now we're shaping. The way that we live right now is making a difference in someone's life. Someone is watching. And we're all making a legacy, good or bad. So that choice is up to you and I. So today, God is challenging you and I to look at our house. Not our four walls with a roof, but our zone of influence everywhere that we have life, everywhere that we live life. And to ask ourselves, is that place a place where our convictions about Christ are leading to a living legacy that we're proud of, that brings glory to God and glory to our name, and a hope and a promise for those who are following after us? And if it's not, it might be time for you and I to flip our house. Amen. Get the praise team to come forward, please. As we sing our